So I'll tell you a story. The first time that I was introduced to these notions of skeletal variation and the idea of a tensile force in the body versus a compressive force in the body, tensile being feeling the softer tissues of your body get stretched tight and long when you're in a posture, and that restricting you from going further, versus a compressive sensation, which is body parts meeting, whether they be soft, fleshy body parts meeting, like I just talked about before with the forearm and the bicep, or a little bit firmer, like some flesh and a bone, or quite hard, two bones kind of pressing together. The first time I was introduced to these concepts was the first time I went to India to do my second yoga teacher training, fresh off the back of doing a year-long teacher training in Melbourne. And it was amazing that the teacher training was set in an ashram, and I really had no idea what to anticipate sort of rolling into a lifestyle like that. So as short-term residents of that ashram, we were invited to live that life with a daily program of how everyone, all the ashramites, lived, which meant we got up super early and went to temple, where we sat for quite a few hours listening to chants, joining in on the chants, listening to a lot of Hindi as Guru Dev spoke to the community. Luckily, there were enough of us to warrant tuning into a little transistor radio as we were receiving an English translation in our ears, which was very, very thoughtful and helpful. And then we would do our yoga teacher training after that. We would sit and have lessons. We would do a lot of asana. It was a very, very beautiful, rich, deep complement to some training that I'd done in Melbourne, which was a little bit more westernized. It was wonderful to have both of those experiences and then see them kind of melt into each other, see what resonated, see what I left behind. The anatomy component of that teacher training was having us just sit and watch Paul Grilly's anatomy DVD, which at the time, admittedly, I thought was a bit lazy. I thought, you're just going to Troy McClure us with a little anatomy video? Okay. But looking back, I'm so grateful, because even though I was making a lot of notes and I was listening to what Paul Grilly had to say, who's kind of the grandfather of bringing this information to us, an epic yin yoga teacher, him and Susie Grilly, his wonderful wife, it didn't quite dawn on me how important that information was that I was learning. And I proceeded to watch that content again and again years later. But it was actually remarkable, and I think that was actually a really, really clever way to incorporate the anatomy information into a yoga teacher training. Because you can go and study anatomy at university, which I've done 3 times. 3 different universities I've studied anatomy. And when you're studying anatomy in a textbook, it's all illustrations. And if you're studying the musculature of the body, it's names of muscles, origins and insertions. Here are the names of the bones. There's a lot of Latin to learn. Here's how the joints work. But it's all quite removed from the human. There was nothing in any of those university trainings that really emphasized the variance in bones and the implication for movement. One of those degrees was a podiatry degree, so it was very much about biomechanics and the physics of bodies moving through space. And in a very kind of scientific way, peer-reviewed papers and literature and things that we had to read. A lot of it was about interventions for things like flat feet or diabetic ulcers on the foot, things like that. But I, on reflection, I think back and I wonder if anybody that's learning that or teaching that knows about skeletal variation. Because a lot of people that I've met in yoga haven't known anything about this. And I've been blessed to have the opportunity to share this information with people that have done teacher trainings in the anatomy lectures. And I love it so much because people have these extraordinary light bulb moments. Like, oh, that explains why I've been working on this posture forever and I simply cannot get my hips and my heels closer together. Oh, I've been trying to get my heels to the floor in downward facing dog for years. That's why. And actually giving them the information in the other part of the body to tell them that the reason their heels are not getting to the floor is because maybe the bones at the front of their ankle are in compression. Or in the case of someone who has their hips and heels far apart in, say, child's pose, their femur bone or the flesh of their quadriceps and the front pointy asis bone of their pelvis might be compressing. Or their ankle might be compressing against the floor. And what that compression feels like. So when I said before that I think one of the most powerful things we can do to help bring this information to light is to start really giving our students the clues and the descriptors of what they would feel in their body if they were coming up against a compressive sensation. When you've got compression happening in the body, that front of the hip bones and thigh bone example is a really, really good one. When you've got that kind of compression happening and it's painful, it's not helpful to try and get more movement at that spot. It's stuck. With all the good intention in their hearts, a lot of yoga teachers would walk around to that kind of instance and think, oh, I've got a great adjustment for you. And put their hands on the back of the sacrum and push them down further. Which opens up a whole other tangent of things I could talk about, because that's going to make that way more painful for the student. And I reckon 9 times out of 10 that student's not going to say anything back. They're just going to grimace and go, help. They might just think, oh, I guess this is supposed to hurt. Or they may not want to make a fuss. Or they may not want to disrespect the teacher. A whole lot of psychological things can be going on there. But in compressive circumstances, it's not really a valuable thing to be sitting into that kind of pinching pain. It's not going to do you any good. It's not something that we're supposed to experience on the path to enlightenment. It doesn't really have a helpful use. On the flip side, that's the body trying to communicate to you to move. Ow, this is hurting me. Something weird happens in yoga where we don't listen to that, or we think that that's not worthy of being listened to. That's another tangent. I'm just going to throw out a few tangents that I may or may not come back to. So when you are in a yoga posture, let's use yoga because that's my bag. When you're in a yoga posture and there is that painful pinching compression sensation, the only real tool that you have at your disposal is to make space. And what that making space usually means is to move those body parts away from each other. And that is where things get a little bit tricky when we're thinking about the idea of very strict alignment cues for quote unquote safety. This is how you do the pose safely. This is how you do it correctly. One person trying to do it in the correct way is actually going to be very painful for them because of the shape of their bones. And to somebody who's learning to teach yoga or already teaching yoga that's not aware of this, even though you're coming from a really good place, what you're doing is communicating to that student that the painful position is correct. And so they sort of have to grapple with that psychologically and physically. Because when you start to make space around compression, you're going to be colouring outside the lines of what we've been told is the, safe alignment for a particular posture. And all the yin yoga trainings that I've been present at, that I've done myself as a student, this is kind of one of the beautiful tenets, that this sort of aesthetic idea of what a posture is supposed to look like is nowhere near as important as what it feels like to you. Because the feeling is giving you really important information about whether you need to move something